silence was louder than the slap. 1 second, she was a minimum wage waitress covered in tears and spilled wine. The next, the city's most dangerous man, the mafia boss with tattoos covering his face, was staring down his hysterical wife. But the terrifying stillness in his eyes wasn't for his attacker. He reached out, wiping the humiliation from her cheek with a terrifying tenderness. Then he looked at the woman who struck her and delivered the cold verdict that shattered his empire. He didn't say, "You're fired." He said 3 words that destroyed his marriage. "She is my blood." The waitress is the mafia boss's daughter, and the mother just became a target. Who is coming for the new heir now that the empire is literally on fire? 3 hours earlier, Lana Hayes was battling exhaustion and necessity. She quickly checked the clock in the staff bathroom, running on the fumes of optimism and triple-shot espresso. She desperately needed this double shift to cover the next installment of her pre-med tuition. Smoothing down her crisp white apron, she mentally rehearsed being invisible, exactly what a waitress at the Crimson Key needed to be. "The Wilsons, Lana." "Table 1, her manager whispered, his voice laced with dread. They practically own the kitchen, no mistakes. As Lana approached the VIP section, she felt the oppressive weight of wealth and danger. Arthur Wilson dominated the space with a silent, lethal control. Susan, meanwhile, was already waving a dismissive hand. "Just bring me the Gewürztraminer, darling." Expensive, obviously. Lana felt Arthur's unsettling gaze sweep over her, but she forced herself to focus on service, ignoring the inexplicable flicker of familiarity she felt in his presence. If you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. Your support helps us to bring more interesting stories like this, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let's begin. Lana delivered the Gewürztraminer swiftly, the bottle chilled perfectly. She focused intently on the rim of the glass, maintaining a steady pour, desperately trying to appear as automated and flawless as the dining room itself. Susan Wilson kept her face angled toward her phone, offering sharp, unnecessary verbal nudges to critique Lana's speed. But it was Arthur Wilson who demanded the most mental energy. His silence was an act of dominance. His steel-cold eyes didn't just look at Lana. They studied her, the tension in her jaw, the exhaustion she fought to hide, and the slight, involuntary rhythm of her foot tapping that marked her years on the hustle. Lana felt the unblinking intensity of his gaze like a tangible weight, a spotlight she couldn't escape. For 20 tense minutes, Lana managed the table flawlessly, but the trouble started when the conversation lulled. Susan, mid-rant about a rival's inferior diamond bracelet, settled back in her chair. Seeing the wine glass nearly empty, Lana, in her effort to be efficiently invisible, reached for it. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I clear this?" Lana asked softly, her tone deferential. Susan looked up, her expression morphing instantly from boredom to theatrical offense. "Are you rushing me, girl?" "It is not empty," she sneered, and with a sudden, sharp, and utterly unnecessary yank, she pulled the glass back toward her. In that fraction of a second, the delicate balance of the serving tray in Lana's hands was broken. The wine glass, now vibrating from the sudden pull, tipped. A splash of chilled Sauvignon Blanc arced through the air and landed squarely on the front of Susan's sapphire silk gown. A stunned silence, heavier than the moment before, fell upon table 1. Lana's heart slammed into her ribs. Susan stood up slowly, her eyes wide, tracking the spreading stain as if it were a mortal wound. Then her face contorted into pure, entitled fury. This was more than a spill. This was an affront to her status, and she used it to launch the full-scale class-based assault. "You clumsy, ignorant fool," Susan shrieked, the sound echoing through the room. "You cheap, minimum-wage trash. Did you deliberately try to ruin this? People like you are always trying to tear down what you can't afford." Lana's cheeks burned with shame and righteous anger. "Ma'am, it was an accident. I deeply apologize. I will pay for the cleaning immediately." "Pay for it?" Susan scoffed, tossing her blonde hair. "You couldn't afford the dry cleaning solvent, much less the limited edition silk. I demand you fire this pathetic excuse for a server, Arthur. Now. You owe me that much, Cinderella." Arthur Wilson remained unnervingly still through the entire tirade. He watched the viciousness, but his eyes were locked on a specific detail, the flicker of defiance in Lana's eyes as she defended herself. It reminded him too powerfully of the past. He ran a thumb over the cold, smooth casing of his phone inside his pocket, confirming the text had been sent to Dmitri. He was inwardly performing the tertiary conflict, weighing his trophy wife's loyalty against this strange, irresistible pull toward the waitress. Susan shrieked one final time, her voice cracking with entitlement. "Arrest her. Throw her out. Will you just do something, Arthur?" Arthur Wilson slowly began to rise from his chair. He placed his linen napkin beside his plate, the soft fabric hitting the wood with the distinct sound of a final, terrifying decision. The tension was unbearable, as the entire restaurant collectively leaned forward to witness whose side the Mafia Boss would choose. What choice will the Mafia Boss make? Drop your comment and subscribe to know what happened next. Arthur Wilson didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply rose, and the sound of his custom-built chair scraping back from the table was the loudest noise in the opulent, terrified room. Every high roller, every mistress, and every server froze, knowing this silent motion was the true catalyst for disaster. Susan Wilson, blinded by her own venomous entitlement, barely registered the movement. "I said, do something. You sit there like a stone while this trash ruins $10,000 worth of silk." Arthur ignored the last part. He didn't glance at the ruined gown or the terrified waitress. His eyes, the color of gunmetal, were fixed only on his wife. His voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous growl that cut through Susan's hysteria like a whip. "Twist 1, the defense." "Enough, Cinderella," he stated, using the saccharine nickname reserved for her most public appearances, stripping it of its affection. "The dress is replaceable. This spectacle is not." The effect was instantaneous and deeply shocking. Susan stopped mid-sentence, her mouth gaping. For Arthur Wilson to defend an employee, especially one of low status and without immediate apology over his trophy, wife in public, was not just strange. It was a profound, cold-blooded dismissal of her value. The brief defense, meant to quell the storm, instead fed it with the fury of a spurned partner. Susan saw not a mild command, but an unforgivable betrayal. Her eyes narrowed, fixing on Lana with a hatred so intense it seemed to physically burn the air. "Replaceable?" Susan shrieked, ignoring the room and her husband entirely. "I am your wife, and she is nothing but a dirty little saboteur. Look at her, always watching, always waiting for a handout. People like her are trying to tear down everything we worked for, Arthur. They think they deserve what is ours." She stepped forward, driven by a pride that overshadowed all caution, and in a reckless, uncontrolled act of pure malice. "Twist 2, the reckless assault." Her diamond-heavy hand shot out. The crack echoed. It was sharp, undeniable, and chilling, sounding like a high-caliber round fired in the sudden silence of the dining room. The slap connected with Lana's cheek, the force snapping her head sideways, the last vestiges of wine mixed with fresh tears, stinging the new, red welts of humiliation and pain. Then came the absolute silence, the true climax of the title. It was a ringing, suffocating vacuum where the only sound was Susan's ragged, triumphant breathing. All eyes were instantly drawn back to Arthur. He did not flinch, did not shout, and did not move quickly. The room understood. His rage was too deep for mere action. It was a cold, calculating force that would be delivered with surgical precision. Arthur's blank expression hardened into something colder than granite. He was past anger. He was calculating a cost. He walked around the table, his steps slow and deliberate, the movement radiating a terrifying certainty. He didn't acknowledge Susan, who was still muttering incoherent insults, drunk on her own power play. He simply moved, dismissing her existence entirely. He stopped directly in front of Lana, whose entire body was trembling, her eyes wide with shock and fear. The heavily tattooed arms visible beneath his suit jacket seemed to darken in the ambient light. He reached out, not to strike, but with a terrifying tenderness that defied his reputation. His thumb gently wiped the path of tears and wine from Lana's cheek. For a long, paralyzing moment, his steel-cold gaze remained on Lana's face, searching for something. Then, without warning, his eyes snapped up and locked onto Susan, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The terrifying blankness was replaced by a look of blazing, unforgiving fury. Arthur's thumb lingered on Lana's reddened cheek, a devastatingly gentle touch from a man whose hands were known for breaking bones. The contrast between the raw violence of the slap and the strange tenderness of his wipe was unbearable. He withdrew his hand, the gesture complete. He didn't look back at the horrified faces watching from the dining room, nor did he look at his hysterical wife. His focus was entirely on Susan. "You are finished, Cinderella," Arthur stated, his voice now devoid of the growl, settling into a cold, flat register that was far more terrifying. Not for spilling wine, not for the spectacle." Susan, momentarily silenced by the shock of his touch, found her voice, high-pitched and hysterical. "You defend her? Over me? The woman who built your legitimate empire with you? She's a nobody, a thief." Arthur smiled then, a small, chilling upward curl of his lips that was both foreign and lethal. He took a single, slow step toward Susan, closing the distance between them. "She is not a nobody," he corrected, his voice so quiet the surrounding tables had to strain to hear. Then he delivered the 3 words that shattered the entire evening, the twist 3, the paternity reveal. "She is my blood." A collective, audible gasp rippled through the Crimson Key. Champagne glasses rattled. Lana, confused and still vibrating with pain and adrenaline, could only stare, the words meaningless to her. This man? The gangster with the tattooed face and the predator's eyes? Susan, however, understood immediately. Her face, moments ago furious, was now ghastly white, sinking into immediate, frantic denial. "No, a lie! You're lying to cover her clumsiness. She is nothing. A waitress. You had no children. We checked everything." Arthur's gaze grew distant, slipping back through time a brief flashback fragment. Moscow, 25 years ago. The smell of cheap vodka and expensive leather. A beautiful, fierce woman named Alina, a trusted contact who was his equal in ambition and danger. Their brief, passionate entanglement before the inevitable separation. The cold-hearted report that came later. A clean sweep, the pregnant contact, and the unborn child killed by a rival, cleanly eliminating any weakness. Arthur had carried that lie, and the resulting hollow victory ever since. Months ago, he had come to the Crimson Key for a neutral meeting. He saw Lana across the room, the striking resemblance to his own late mother, the same proud set to her jaw, the impossible tilt of her head. He had discreetly pulled a hair from her coat one day and sent it off. He had been waiting, protecting her from the shadows, knowing the truth meant his entire world would shift. Susan's recklessness forced his hand. "Alina did not die in childbirth, Susan. She was told I was dead by Volkov's people," Arthur explained, his voice flat. "And she protected our daughter until her last breath. I am protecting her now." Lana shook her head, tears finally clearing the fog of shock. The slap had hurt, but this revelation was devastating. "No, stop it. My mother was Amelia Hayes. She worked 2 jobs. Arthur cut her off, his eyes filled with a grim, fierce conviction. "Amelia Hayes was a fiction, a name to hide under. You have your mother's spirit, but you have my blood. You are a Wilson." Susan began to keen, her entitlement dissolving into terror. "If this is true, what does this mean for me?" "Arthur, I didn't know. I would never." Arthur ignored her pathetic plea. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket, withdrawing a thick, sealed manila envelope. His lips curved into that cold, dangerous smile again. This was not a negotiation or an emotional moment. This was the presentation of evidence. He pulled his hand out, holding the envelope containing the DNA results and legal documents naming Lana as his heir. He did not hand it over. Instead, with a gesture of terrifying finality, he slammed the envelope onto the table. The fate of Susan and the start of Lana's new, dangerous life depends on the contents of that envelope. The manila envelope, thick and heavy with the weight of shattered lives and forged identities, lay flat on the marble table. Susan Wilson, her terror escalating into genuine madness, lunged for it, her sapphire gown rustling violently. "Give me that. It's a fraud," she shrieked. Arthur Wilson reacted with blinding speed. His large, heavily tattooed hand slammed down onto the envelope, flattening it instantly and pinning Susan's reaching fingers beneath his immense palm. The contact was not a push, but a decisive statement of dominance that cracked the air. Susan gasped, pulling her hand back, whimpering. Arthur didn't even look at her. His cold eyes scanned the periphery of the dining room until they landed on the manager, Richard, who was currently frozen in place, pale and trembling. "You," Arthur commanded, his voice sharp and absolute. "Open this. Read the contents to the room." Richard, understanding that compliance was his only route to survival, fumbled for the envelope, tearing the clasp open. His voice shook as he read the scientific and legal documentation out loud, publicly validating the proof. The forensic report detailing the DNA match was over 99.999% conclusive. Lana Hayes was the biological daughter and legal heir of Arthur Wilson. The silence in the Crimson Key was now total, broken only by Richard's rapid, terrified breathing. Arthur turned his full, terrifying attention back to Susan, delivering the verdict in a tone that promised biblical retribution. "You touched what is mine," Arthur stated, his words slow, deliberate, and final. "You struck my child. You sought to humiliate her, not for spilled wine but for her station. I built this empire with violence, and I will tear down everything you thought you had in this life, with nothing more than a pen." It was a cold, brutal declaration of war. Susan's social standing, her wealth, her very identity, were all predicated on Arthur's power, and he was taking it all back. He reached up to the lapel of his suit and spoke into the discreet mic hidden there, his voice a calm, lethal efficiency that chilled the blood more than any shout. "The punishment. Dimitri," he instructed, addressing his head of security who was waiting nearby. "Mrs. Wilson requires an escort out. Terminate all joint accounts, seize her personal assets as per the prenuptial agreement, and ensure she never enters a Petro property again. She is no longer family. I want her gone before she finishes her next breath." Susan's denial finally shattered. Realizing the total finality of her destruction, she didn't scream or fight. She collapsed, a heap of ruined sapphire silk and defeated pride, sobbing hysterically on the marble floor. Arthur ignored her theatrical display completely. He turned back to Lana, who was staring, aghast, at the crumpled figure of the woman who had just assaulted her. Arthur's face softened slightly, the fury receding, replaced by a grim determination. He reached out and gently unfastened the strings of Lana's apron, pulling the thin, stained fabric from her waist. "You don't belong here, Lana," he decreed, his eyes locked on hers. "You belong with me. Go home. You're never working another shift again." The silence that had previously been born of terror was now replaced by the quiet, terrifying efficiency of Dimitri and two grim-faced men moving in on Susan. They didn't ask. They simply lifted the collapsed woman and began the process of her utter, public, and immediate downfall, leaving Arthur and Lana standing in the ruins of the evening. What devastating retribution will Susan attempt now that she's been stripped of everything? The sheer, terrifying efficiency of Arthur Wilson's organization was now on full display. As Susan lay in a heap of sapphire silk, the two men of Dimitri's detail moved with the silent, brutal grace of predators. They did not speak. They simply secured Susan, ignoring her escalating screams and flailing protests. "Arthur, you can't do this. I am your wife. I am Cinderella," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the panic of a woman whose world was dissolving beneath her. "You need me. You need my connections." Arthur did not spare her a glance. He was already facing away, retrieving his jacket. The sound of Susan's desperate, theatrical pleas was met with a cold, absolute silence that demonstrated his verdict was not reversible. Dimitri's men hauled her, protesting and scratching, out of the opulent dining room, her dignity and her entire financial life left behind on the stained marble floor. Lana stood paralyzed, clutching the crumpled, stained waitress apron Arthur had gently removed. One moment she was being slapped, the next she was watching the collapse of a mafia queen. It was too much for her tired pre-med brain to process. Arthur looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "We're leaving." He personally escorted Lana out through the kitchen, a path of least resistance. He did not speak to her during the ride. The interior of his armored, black sedan was dark and silent, heavy with the terrifying potential of his power. Lana sat rigid, the apron clutched to her chest, the raw ache of the slap still pulsing beneath her skin. She was transitioning from being a minimum wage target to being the Mafia Boss's most precious cargo. She saw the expensive architecture passing by, but her world was spinning too fast. They pulled up to a discreet, high-rise building that whispered wealth. Arthur led her into an apartment that was vast, starkly modern, and impersonal. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, more like a prison cell made of crystal than a home. "This is yours now," Arthur stated, handing her a key fob and a secure satellite phone. "The first step. Dimitri has already set up the protective detail. You are safe here. You will not be working. You will finish your education." Lana finally found her voice, sharp with suspicion born of trauma. "Safe? I was just slapped by your wife, who you've now ruined. And you think I'm safe? I don't want this. I don't want your money or your dangerous life." She threw the apron onto the sleek marble counter. "I want my old life back." "Your old life was a lie based on a rival's betrayal," Arthur countered, utterly calm. "This is the truth, and safety is relative. You are a target now, whether you accept my name or not. But here, you are my target to protect." He then walked toward the window, his back to Lana, and pulled out a second, smaller phone. This was Arthur's action, showing the final, ruthless side of his power. "It is done. All assets frozen. Legal paperwork filed. The transfer of the Petrov shares is complete. She gets nothing," he confirmed into the phone, his voice flat. He was ruthlessly efficient, erasing a decade-long marriage with a few clinical words. As Arthur finished his call, Lana wandered through the sterile perfection of the apartment. She felt alien here, disconnected from her purpose. Her fingers ran over a mahogany desk, and she noticed a small, sealed, unmarked manila envelope tucked into a drawer. Hesitantly, she pulled it out and tore it open. Inside, there was no more DNA proof, no more legal documents, only a single, faded photograph. It showed a much younger, less scarred Arthur Wilson, his face almost boyish, and standing beside him was a smiling woman. She was beautiful, fierce, and bore an uncanny resemblance to Lana herself. It was Alina. Lana stared at the photo, the cold clinical reality of the DNA test finally crashing into the raw, emotional truth of her origins. She gripped the photograph, realizing the man downstairs, the cold, terrifying Mafia Boss, was not just claiming her as an heir. He was claiming a memory he thought was dead. Lana is safe but alone, holding the key to her past. Can Arthur truly protect her from a vengeful Susan who knows all of his secrets? Days bled into a meaningless blur inside the penthouse. Lana's transition was complete. The waitress apron was gone, replaced by a life cocooned in high thread count sheets and unrelenting silence. Her new reality was a high-security bubble chauffeurs, bodyguards, and a secure phone that vibrated only with Arthur's infrequent messages. She couldn't return to her college courses, couldn't risk the old routines. The opulence felt suffocating, and the lack of purpose was a heavier burden than the double shifts ever were. Lana tried to channel her pre-med discipline into investigation. She spent hours in the apartment's secure study area, using the untraceable computer to research her newfound father and the name of her mother, Alina. The information on Alina was scant and coded, referencing old Russian contacts and silent partnerships. The information on Arthur Wilson was vast and chilling, a tapestry of rumored violence, ruthless acquisitions, and legitimate businesses built on suspiciously quick expansion. Her internal conflict was a constant, grinding battle. Every time she looked at the expensive designer clothes Arthur had arranged, or ate a perfectly prepared meal delivered by a silent servant, she tasted the morality of crime. Was she safer as the mafia princess, or had she simply traded the risk of a spilled drink for the risk of a rival's bullet? The weight of the slap had faded, but the weight of the name Wilson was only growing heavier. Arthur visited sporadically. These were not the visits of a father trying to bond, but of a mob boss managing an asset. He was awkward, severe, and painfully honest. During one visit, he sat across the dining table, nursing a scotch. "Your mother was fire, Lana," he murmured, his tattooed hand gripping the glass tightly. "She was the only person who saw past the organization. She was my last connection to humanity." He looked at her then, his steel-cold eyes holding an unfamiliar vulnerability. "You are that connection now." He offered no apology for his life, nor did he offer justification. "I promised your mother you would be safe," he continued. "You will be kept clean of the business. You will finish your studies. Your job is to live the life she wanted for you. My job is to ensure no one touches you." Lana was about to challenge him, to question the morality of her inheritance, when her new, secure phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. The message was cryptic, written in a sophisticated, almost conversational tone, but it carried the sting of poison. "I see the waitress is playing princess now. Too bad the glass slipper still fits your old neighborhood. Some habits and some enemies are hard to shake." The message was unsigned, but the reference to Cinderella and old neighborhood was a cold-blooded signature. Susan was not gone. She was watching. The first threat had landed, confirming Lana had inherited an enemy with intimate knowledge of Arthur's weak spots. Panic coiled in Lana's gut. Susan knew where she lived before. Susan knew her weaknesses. Driven by a desperate need for confirmation, Lana accessed the secure computer again, filtering through the logs for any unauthorized probes. It took her 30 frantic minutes, but she found it. A sophisticated, anonymized IP address, likely routing through 3 different countries, had accessed the records of her old community college and, worse, her bank statements from a week prior. The inquiry wasn't about her new life. It was about her history, her contacts, and her patterns of movement. Lana felt the blood drain from her face. Susan wasn't just planning revenge. She was targeting Lana's past to tear down Arthur's present. She had inherited an enemy who knew all the access codes to the life she was desperately trying to leave behind. Can Arthur truly protect Lana from a vengeful Susan who knows all of his secrets? The confrontation escalated from the moment Lana stepped into Arthur's formidable, high-security manor, a structure that radiated quiet power and zero hospitality. She slammed the printout of the anonymous text onto his custom-built antique mahogany desk. "Don't tell me I'm safe," Lana challenged, her voice vibrating with fear and residual fury. "Susan knows about my old life. She's tracking me. I found the probes into my old bank and school records. I need the full truth, not just about Alina, but about your enemies. Who did you marry to, and who did you ruin for this empire?" Arthur didn't flinch. He picked up the text, confirming the danger without flattery. He settled back, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the ceiling, preparing for the painful honesty of Arthur's confession. "You read about my rise, Lana. It was a brutal consolidation of power," he began, his voice flat and historical. "When I consolidated the North District, I had tactical allies. Your mother, Alina, was the best of them, and the most fiercely loyal woman I have ever known. But when I chose to sever ties with the Russian sector, a rival orchestrated a devastating lie. I was told she and the child you were eliminated during an ambush. It was a strategic lie designed to destroy my resolve and steal my territory." He let the truth hang in the air. "The organization, Lana, requires political marriages. Susan brought us legitimacy and connections. She was a useful, necessary alliance, but she was never meant to be my life. She was a placeholder. You," he looked directly at Lana, "are the redemption I didn't know I still had left." "Who lied to you?" Lana pressed, gripping the edge of the desk. Arthur's face darkened with a deep, cold hatred. The rival was finally named. The man who organized the ambush. The man who lied about Alina's death. And the man who now leads the most significant rival family in the city. Ivan Volkov. Volkov saw Susan as an extension of my power. He now sees you as my greatest and most exposed weakness. A heavy silence followed, broken by a discreet, sharp buzz from the manor's internal security line. Arthur answered, his posture tightening instantly. He ended the call, his jaw clenched, and pointed toward a small velvet-lined box on a side table. It was expected, he stated grimly. That arrived 10 minutes ago. Lana cautiously opened the box. Inside, resting on the luxurious fabric, was a small, torn piece of white cotton, the cuff of her old waitress apron, the one she had tossed aside. It was deliberately and viciously shredded. Beside it, printed on a small, elegant card, was a single chilling word: soon. The escalation was complete. Susan, stripped of everything, had found a way to use her intimate knowledge of his life to strike. Arthur looked at the ruined apron, then at Lana, his face grim with cold calculation. This is no longer a matter of pride, Lana. Susan has given Volkov the information he needs to bypass our perimeter. We move immediately. We leave the country tonight. The secure terminal monitor on the desk flickered, then went completely black. The emergency lights in the study blinked on. Before either of them could move, the heavy mahogany door to the study burst inward, slamming against the wall. Dmitri, Arthur's head of security, staggered into the room, his face bloody, his breath ragged. "Boss! They're in! It's not Susan's hit team," Dmitri gasped, clutching his side. Volkov's men. They knew the internal layout. They bypassed the east sector. Arthur's eyes snapped to Lana, recognizing the irreversible trap. The fortress had been compromised from the inside, using the knowledge Susan sold. The security feed cutting out was the signal. Dmitri's bloodied figure bursting through the study door was the confirmation. Ivan Volkov had breached Arthur Wilson's fortress using compromised intel. The time for diplomacy, discussion, or even explanation was over. Arthur did not hesitate. His massive frame moved with the trained, lethal grace of a coiled spring. He shunted Lana toward a recessed panel disguised as a bookshelf. "Dmitri, secure the perimeter doors. Lana, move." Arthur pulled a suppressed handgun from a hidden compartment and fired 2 precision shots into the hallway, just as the first 2 masked men rounded the corner. The sound was a dull thwump-thwump, and the figures dropped silently. The final threat had begun, and Arthur was demonstrating the ruthless efficiency hidden beneath his bespoke suit. They moved through the manor's service corridors. Arthur, despite the darkness and the chaos, navigated with terrifying certainty. As they scrambled past the deactivated laser grid leading to the underground garage, Arthur paused, his face etched in grim confirmation. "The auxiliary grid is offline," he rasped, reloading his weapon. Only 5 people, including Susan, knew that manual override code. She didn't just tell him we were leaving. "The betrayal is complete. She sold Volkov the blueprints and codes to my home." Lana felt a fresh wave of cold horror. Susan wasn't just spiteful. She was actively complicit in murder, weaponizing her decade of privileged information. They reached the reinforced steel door of the sublevel garage, their final escape route. As Arthur keyed in the complex sequential code, a calm, mocking voice echoed from the shadows. "Going so soon, Arthur? I thought we might reminisce." Ivan Volkov stepped out from behind a black SUV, flanked by 2 armed guards. He was lean, elegant, and held a polished pistol aimed squarely at Arthur's chest. The garage door remained stubbornly sealed. "Hello, Ivan," Arthur said, his voice flat. "I offer you a choice, my old friend," Volkov purred, gesturing toward Lana. "You walk away now. Leave the girl. You can recover and fight me tomorrow, as rivals should. Or," he tilted his head, smiling cruelly, "you die here, protecting the unexpected, sentimental weakness you found in a waitress." Lana's breath hitched. Arthur looked at Volkov, then back at Lana, his cold eyes burning with a conviction that transcended fear. "She is my blood," Arthur said, his tone a quiet, devastating vow. "And you will never touch her." Arthur hurled his phone at Volkov's head, distracting him just long enough to drop into a low, aggressive stance. The duel was instant and brutal. Volkov fired, the blast deafening in the enclosed space. Arthur took the hit, a searing pain exploding in his shoulder, but he closed the distance, his suppressed pistol spitting once, disabling Volkov's gun hand. The fight devolved into a savage, close-quarters combat. Arthur, fueled by a primal need to protect his daughter, used the granite strength of his body, slamming Volkov into the concrete pillar. He defeated his rival, leaving Volkov stunned and bleeding, but the bullet in his shoulder was a crippling price. "Dmitri!" Arthur bellowed, staggering toward the already opening escape door. "Take her! Go!" He shoved Lana into the back of a waiting armored car. His face was pale, his movements labored, but his decree was absolute. The resolution, the Petrov accounts, the shell corporations, they're all registered to Lana now. "You are the de facto head of the legitimate empire," he gasped, forcing a slim, secure satellite device into her hand. "Go. Don't look back. I will find you." The car roared out of the garage. Lana, weeping now, twisted in her seat, watching the manor recede in the rear-view camera. As they reached the highway, a blinding orange light filled the screen, the distinct, terrifying visual of an explosion. Arthur had stayed behind to ensure their escape. Safe but utterly alone, Lana stared at the secure device in her hand. A final message, clearly timed, to send the instant of his final action, popped onto the screen. "Be careful, daughter. Susan is still loose, and the empire is now yours." The Mafia Boss's wife was gone, but the Mafia Boss's daughter remained, heir to a throne built on blood, violence, and now, relentless revenge. Lana Hayes, the waitress, was dead. Lana Wilson, the target and the heiress, faced the dawn. What will Lana's first move as the new head of the Wilson Empire be? And how will she begin to use her father's power to fight the vengeful enemy she's inherited? Comment next episode to find out in the next episode. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next. Don't forget to subscribe.